We are the home of Vox-Free Innsmouth, infecting the ear holes of the Underhive with the sump crust of freedom. A shining beacon of truth in the dark tides of Imperial propaganda. 665.66 UHM Chemrat Radio.
Well, that's one way to wake up, Gabo. It's bound to be another humid week as Blood Rain continues to paint the mid-districts, so buckle down and get used to the iron smell of wasted ozone and hydraulic fluid. Yum.
Well, we'll continue to take refuge here at Slackjaw Alley, staying out of as much of this oily rain as we can. You know, I've got to love that over here I can get a bowl of corpse starch noodles, and then I can walk right across the alley and get some barbecue gobbler pig belly to add right on top. How many toilets would you give Slackjaw Alley?
The Slackjaw Alley or the barbecue gobbler pig belly?
I mean, I guess they're all different places, aren't they?
I would give the gobbler the old 3 toilets. Pretty solid, but, you know, in the end, it could be your end.
Well, I'll tell you how it is at the end of our transmission. How about that?
In other news, gangland executions by the warmongers. Apparently there's some shit-talking, quite literally. Got a bit out of hand at the hangnail. Someone thought that they could duke out the biggest poop, and the warmongers took that to exception.
Violently? Like they ended the conversation?
Let's just say the poop was bigger.
Okay.
I wasn't there for that, but I heard about it. That guy, not gonna be talking shit anymore.
Continue to check out your boys, broadcasting live from all across the Underhive. I am your lovable idiot with an ancient tome. I'm probably going to open at an inappropriate time, Goblin King. Today I am joined by our oblivious delivery boy, Marky.
What is it? Clock to, knock to, is that right?
That sounds close enough. The hero jock who shows up in force, but may not live past Act 3, Beast.
I'd say like Act 1.
And today we are thankfully joined by the voice of reason, the witty and wise Professor Chac.
Hey, guys.
He's going to try to talk me out of reading from this book.
Yeah, you know, every time you pick up something that's bound in human skin, it's not a good idea.
These pages smell bloody.
That's up to interpretation.
Oh shit, that's the Karma Sutra again. God damn it.
That's not blood.
It's made out of human foreskin.
That must be a goddamn good Kama Sutra. Jesus.
This is our 7th episode of Lorus Obscurus. We are going to be getting into some more big, feedy details here in just a couple of minutes. But as you might notice, we do have a guest today. Chac came on the show. He's got some insights on Big Feet, but he's also been playing Warhammer for a couple of years. So we wanted to pick his brain and get a little teaser of a community spotlight episode. We will be doing one with Chac coming up here soon. But Chac, how long have you been playing the game?
Yeah,
what are
fairly,
some of your
fairly new, right, Chac?
Fairly new.
Yesterday?
So I picked up this little book when I was in college. It was called Rogue Trader. Came out in 87. And so that's when I started playing. And I played, so that's first edition. I played second and third edition. And I basically stopped there and then fell out of the hobby until pandemic. I actually really don't know how to play the modern game. I haven't played.
Shut up, really?
It's changed a lot. Just wrapping your head around the layers of, you know, all the different, I mean, yeah, I know the turns and all that sort of stuff, right? You know, I can do that, but all of the strategies and all that sort of thing with like, it's more in depth than it used to be. At least it seems that way to me. Now, when I pick up a codex and I'm like, oh my God, how much stuff do I need to learn?
Layers of rules.
Yeah.
It somehow got more and less complicated at the same time, because I took a hiatus after Warhammer Fantasy Battle died, after the end times, so like 2007 or so, and didn't come back until 8th edition. And I still played miniatures wargaming, and I still did a lot of stuff with lore, but I took a break from the rule set itself. And I was in your position where when I cracked the 8th edition codex and the rule book, I was like, holy shit, what the fuck? But probably by the end of my first or second game with these guys, I was like, oh,
yeah,
this is easier than 4th.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a lot of the vehicle rules have simplified. We don't have the same sort of firing arcs. We don't have the same hitting at different locations on the vehicles. For a while, they got really into more like traditional wargaming, and then they moved away from that to make it easy. I think a lot of it, what you just have to go with, when you play somebody and they say, I'm playing this stratagem, you basically have to go, okay.
Yeah.
And if
I think that's in the almost mid-tier levels as well, because there's like stratagems that like Kevin's like, I'm going to use this stratagem. I'm like, I don't ever remember that stratagem. I'm just going to take your word for it, Kevin.
The stratagem where his vehicle just has more guns, even though that they're not on the vehicle.
All the guns.
Yeah, I don't remember this whole Tau thing with the railgun stratagem and the new rules for that. I think that's all made up. So I'm not going to.
100% made up. Man, people got so salty about those railguns. And like
extremely,
there are 2 or 3 people who play Tau actively in the local circuit. They don't win. I don't know why everybody was like, "Oh, this new railgun rule is going to erase my army." And then the very first time the guys busted out the new railgun rule, I was like, "Oh, that's neat. What was your score? 53 to 97. Oh, who'd you play? Ultramarines. Okay, so you're still not winning? No."
Yeah, but that's how it works, you know. People are always like, "Oh man, I get all this stuff," and then somebody else is like, "Yeah, I'm going to get it too." And they're like, "That's not fair."
Yeah, exactly.
That's how people are.
Yeah. Speaking on the old rules,
I was going to say, do you still have your Rogue Trader book?
I wish I
Marky
did.
and I have been trying to.
Oh,
we've been trying
man.
to
It
find
had so much neat stuff in it. It played more like a role-playing game in a lot of ways because you had environmental stuff. I mean, when was the last time you had a space marine eaten by a clam? Right? That's happened to me. You know, I've had space marines eaten by clams. A lot of the stuff. So if you've listened to some other podcasts that do lore, they talk about like the animals of 40K, and everybody's like, "What are they talking about?" That was all Rogue Trader. They had, you know, you have a little bit the Catachan face hugger leaves and stuff like that, but that doesn't go into gameplay. It went into gameplay back in Rogue Trader.
Yeah.
And yes, there were female space marines in Rogue Trader.
Yes, there were. In fact, I did digging at one point, and this was on a Patreon chunk. So those of you that are listening to the podcast, there's extra content you're missing. There's probably a couple hours at this point. But
easily.
We talked about female space marines because I am working on a female, not really a female space marine army, but I'm working on a space marine army that has female space marines in it. I'm not making them all female. I'm just putting some in it because it makes sense for what I'm doing.
The gene seed.
Second Legion.
So I went back and I read and I dug because I was trying to find, this is another thing. When we started the podcast, I was very convinced. I was very adamant and convinced about my point of view. But I have every single book at this point, except for the Rogue Trader book, as far as the major rule books go. I've got most of the 2nd edition codexes. I've got most of the 3rd edition codexes. I've been collecting, you know, when we do a lore series, I go out and I get the books so I can do research, so I can come up with this stuff. And I found one line, and I cannot remember the book that it was in, but there is one line that says there is suggested evidence that certain gene seed cannot be taken by the female genome. It doesn't even say all.
No,
right.
It just says some. And that's it. It's in one book, and it's in like Astartes Armory or Astartes Armory 4 or something. It's in one of the old
books.
Because there was a set of like not even supplements. There was a set of just lore books that they released at one point. Like there's the Field Guide to the Imperial Guardsmen, which is just like a little silly lore book that they made. They made it Index Astartes at one point, and it's in there. That's where that line is. It's in one of those books.
Hate me or not for my opinion, but me personally, I personally wouldn't put females in my Space Marine army just because I like the whole idea of like being a roided up monster and whatnot. And the idea of, I don't know, a girl being a roided up monster just kind of seems weird to me. I mean, if you want to put that in your army, that's fine. But I like how Noir put it as a to a lore aspect of why they're female Space Marines, or they're not even Space Marines, but they're just females in power armor in his army. I like when there's lore developed behind it, and that's why you're putting female Space Marines or have female Space Marines in your army, versus I'm building a female Space Marine army to get a reaction.
Yeah.
That's the difference with to me, where it's all right, well, I mean, that's kind of lame. If you're building an all-female Space Marine army to get a reaction out of a neckbeard or something, I think that's kind of lame.
If you're building anything just to get a reaction, it's lame.
Right.
But
there are those individuals out there.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's the whole reason that the the chapter Angry Marines exists, was because people wanted to get a rise out of other players. Now it's a meme thing, but
right.
I've got lore as to why females can exist in my Space Marine chapter. My Space Marine chapter also isn't Chaos, and it's not Imperial. It's its own faction that is anti-Nurgle, and that's its only thing. And we'll talk about them probably some point in the future when we've got a little bit more time. But I agree with you. I think there has to be a compelling lore reason for anything you do.
Right.
If you're not just taking the vanilla book, you have to have lore. I'm going to have lore for my trader guard. I've got lore for my rat mech. I've got lore for all these crazy ideas I want to do. There's lore reasons behind them. There's stuff that I've developed. But I also think, as a stance, being a creative writing based podcast, we're in a position, generally speaking, where we don't ever want to tell anybody, no, your idea is dumb. No, we want to hear your idea. Tell us how cool your idea is.
It's just like Rat Mech. If you made Rat, and I personally don't agree with the whole you have to have lore backing it. If you think it looks cool, your Rat Mech. It doesn't make sense. But when you build lore behind it, it's cool. If you built it just because it looks cool, that's cool. And same thing with female Space Marines. If you think female Space Marines look cool and that's why you built them, that's awesome. But if you, again, the whole reactionary thing, it's just that's the thing that kind of irritates me. And it's just it's
when people
bringing
run into
it's bringing politics into a war game that has nothing to do. It's just, to me, it's lame.
It's like going to a music festival and taking pictures of yourself instead of sitting there listening to the music festival.
Right. Yeah.
When I started,
there's music at Coachella.
So when I started, they didn't have the sort of custom chapters that we have now, right? You had legions, the big 100,000 Space Marine legions, but they're missing 2 legions. Remember, you had the 2nd and the 11th, which at that time were called the Lost and the Damned, which is now taken over by Chaos.
It's the Heretic.
Heretic. But at the time, the two missing legions were called the Lost and the Damned. And GW specifically put those in there so you could build your own legion. So there was no lore on them. They've been wiped out completely. They were statues of the Primarchs that are broken and destroyed, and nobody knows what happened to them. And that's where I've always wanted to fit in. If I did a female Space Marine, it would come from one of those legions that was lost in the war. There was lost in the war back prior to the Horus Heresy, right at the beginning, around the Unification Wars. Right when everything happened and, the Space Marines, the Primarchs got scattered all over. Nobody knows what happens to them. And then you know how the warp works with time. And all of a sudden, these early 30K,
Legion,
prior 30K Legion, or a part of that Legion pops back out into present time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
Well, that's a good idea. I
love that. Well, because, think about it. You have all these chapters. You have werewolf Vikings, you have vampires, you have dragons, you have just
any crazy thing you want to do.
Exactly. It's why would a female Space Marine not be a thing?
Yeah. And you could also do the 21st founding. Where
the cursed founding.
The cursed founding, where you had what's the group that ruled the Imperium before Curly Man came back? The Council.
High Lords of Terra.
Yeah.
The High Lords of Terror, let's try all these weird things during this founding, and let's mess with everybody's DNA and the gene seed. And maybe one of those things they messed with was, let's try to shove the gene seed into women for the first time. There you have.
Well, they made Primaris Space Marines. Why would, they made brand new Space Marines. Yeah. I don't see why.
That's what I was telling Noir the other day. He was like talking to me about it, and I was like, he's like, yeah, I can't figure out how to get them to, like, they're given power armor. I'm like, just send them to Mars.
Yeah.
Send them to Mars to become Primaris. Why not?
Yeah.
And he's like, that is pretty easy. I'm like, yeah, just do that. Like, it's not nothing against it.
I have a Space Marine chapter because of a meme. I found a meme that was basically like, what if the meme is a picture of, not World Eaters, Death Shroud. What were their Nurgle guys called before they became Nurgle guys? Not World Eaters.
That's a good one.
Death Guard. Death Guard.
Weren't they War Dogs or something? No, that was World Eaters. Sorry.
It's the Death Guard, right? That's Mortarion's dudes.
Death Guard. Yeah.
So basically the concept was, what if the Death Guard didn't fall to Nurgle but had fought, had become loyalists and had fought against Nurgle, like they specifically went against Nurgle, and I liked that idea, and
Dusk Raiders.
Desecrators?
Yes, Dusk Raiders.
Dusk Raiders.
Oh,
Yeah,
Dusk Raiders.
Yeah. And I really liked that idea, and it's just a meme. It's a meme of modern Death Guard armor, but it's not all corrupted. It's pristine and looks like
I've seen that.
armor.
They have like the big bellies, but it's all clean. There's no guts falling out of them.
Yeah,
It looks pretty cool.
And I was like, that's kind of
that's unplague your Marines.
Yes. And I was like, that's kind of a neat idea. So I started playing around with that. And one of the things that we know through Eldari lore is that Isha, the goddess of life and healing and everything, is captured and held prisoner in Nurgle's garden. And Nurgle experiments on her all of his new plagues. That's how he shows her his love. He experiments his new plagues and everything, and then he unleashes them on the world. Her body, because she's a goddess, is always healing itself. And because it's always healing itself, she knows how to heal these plagues. So she whispers to those who are warp sensitive, to psychics, psychers, the ingredients for the cures. She whispers them out into the warp. And I was like, okay, so I got these two different ideas that are kind of cool. So what I came up with was the idea that there are Space Marines throughout time who were either black or gray shields, depending on which term you want to use, but were at one point Dusk Raiders, did not become world deaths. Why can I not do their stupid Death Guard? Thank you. Who did not become Death Guard, or were Marines that were Death Guard but never accepted the gifts, and they fell. They became renegades against their own chapter, but they didn't join the Imperium. And they would just show up on these battlefields. Through the last 10,000 years, there's been stories that the Imperial Guard have told of these men, these Space Marines marching out of the dust onto battlefields to save their positions. And they're in Dusk Raider armor. They're in Death Guard armor.
Death Guard, yeah.
But they don't look like Death Guard, and they're helping. And all of these rumors started circulating, and then sometimes guard units would go back with them and all this other stuff. So I basically played with those two different concepts, and I came up with the idea that there is an entire Eldari factory that exists that is shunned by Eldari society, just as the Space Marines are. These Space Marines are heretics by the Imperium, that is uplifting humans into Primaris Marines to put them into armor to send them to fight specifically against Nurgle's forces.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
And that's the reason that there's females in the Space Marine chapter, because these guys go out and they save an entire guard regiment that's almost completely wiped out. They bring all of those guard back. 35 of them are women. Great. They're all over the age of 35 years old. Who cares? The Eldar have perfected the Primaris technology because Eldar technology is better than human technology. I rest my case. They don't have to be young kids and they don't have to be boys. Eldar have figured out how to make better Primaris Marines, or how to make a Primaris Marine that doesn't die halfway through the process. They've just perfected the soup. That's it. It's not a better soup. They've just perfected the soup. Anyway, we'll get into that more in the future. But I like that idea.
Hey, Kev. What's going on?
So Kevin has joined us. Anyway, that was some tangents, but that's what we do here. So Chac, what armies?
The rest of this episode is about you, Chac. I promise.
What? Well, we're gonna do a community spotlight. He's getting his own episode. You're not even gonna be in it. No, I'm kidding.
Right.
He's just gonna send us like pictures, and we're gonna.
Hey,
like,
you wanna
like,
you wanna jump
slideshow.
on the podcast and just sit there and not fucking talk?
So tell us about your first couple of armies. Tell us about what brought you back into it in 8th, 9th. Tell us about the stuff that excited you about getting back into the hobby, because it sounded like you got back into the hobby side really heavily, right?
So when I started out way back when, of course, everybody starts out with Space Marines. Everybody's basically first army is Space Marines or something like that. And just about everybody's first model they paint is Space Marines. And when you start the hobby, you think of Space Marines as being the heroes. And then you learn they're not.
Right.
But my first two armies were squats, which I've talked about. So I really like the squats. And back in high school, which was pre-40K, but not pre-Games Workshop. Games Workshop had other games before 40K and Age of Fantasy, or Fantasy Battles, which I played too. And they're really tied in with the British Underground comics you mentioned in the last episode. 2000 AD, Judge Dredd. They actually have a Judge Dredd game that is basically just Arbites.
Yep.
In mega cities, but there's a Judge Dredd game.
So
but
fun.
I was a punker, and I was a real fan of British culture, music, and all that. So of course, I went orcs, old school orcs. And if you didn't know, orcs are just punk culture. You look at the checks, you look at the accent, you look at the boots and the crumpin and the beer drinking, and they're just British punks. That's basically what they were.
Yeah.
And that was part of the culture that I had in high school and a little bit in college. And so I really gravitated towards those guys. Never liked, well, back in the day, it was Eldar, the Eldari. I don't like the cone heads. Never really liked space elves. And then I just sort of like ran out of people to play with. You know, we didn't have the internet. We didn't have all these games, stores and all. It was basically, if you had friends that you could play with, you played. And if you didn't have friends that played 40K and you couldn't get anybody else to collect these little plastic dolls and paint them up, you didn't have games to play. You didn't have people to play with.
Kind of SOL, yeah.
That was always my problem.
I sort of fell off, and I ended up playing other war games. I also played the first Space Hulk. So yeah, I did have some NIDs, but you played Terminators. You didn't play NIDs. And I got into, for a while, doing traditional World War II, World War III war games, sort of, Western, some really involved Western Front ones and stuff like that.
Well, was it hard to find people to play that as well?
I had a couple of friends that did that. They just weren't into the painting and the buying and the collecting. It's an expensive hobby. You got to buy all these things, and you got to have the stores around it. We didn't have game stores that have that, but you could pick up these board games that were, we're not talking like Risk. We're talking about the really big, fold out, huge map war games with the thousands of little cardboard counters and all, playing the defense of Stalingrad.
It's like Gloomhaven, but old school.
And Allies.
Yeah, Axis and Allies is like the easy version of the games we played.
Yeah. I've got
so there's a company called Avalon Hill.
Yeah, it was all the Avalon Hill games.
Box sets.
Yeah. And then I just sort of fell out of it. And I started getting into the pandemic. I bought a filament 3D printer, and I started printing some stuff with that. And then I saw these great miniature models. I tried to print those with a filament printer, and I did get some good ones, but it's really hard to do.
It's really hard to dial that in.
Oh yeah.
And then so I got my first resin printer, which sucked, which is on a shelf back there in a box, and I'll never tell anybody to buy a Creality resin printer. And then I got a couple of Mars printers, and I found Patreon, and I found this guy, DMG Minis, who does Grey Knights, who did basically he's been designing a whole Grey Knights army. And I started printing a Grey Knights army. And then I found these other Patreons, and I'm like, oh, I can print a whole orc army. I used to support Gear Guts. Stopped supporting him on his Patreon because I didn't really like his sculpts and I've got thousands of his files because he's just really, really prolific.
He pumps them out.
I've got thousands of his files, and I think I only followed him for like 6 months.
Yeah, maybe. Exactly. And they're just like, oh my god,
a huge library.
I didn't really like the look, but yeah, the library is huge. And then I started getting some other people, so I started printing out basically 40K stuff, and you're like, well, maybe I should start. And I started buying the books and all. Still haven't played a game since I've been back. I just basically, because I also always followed the lore. Like I read the books, and I read not just the 40K books and the 40K lore, but I also read fantasy books too. So I really like that and all. I don't understand Age of Sigmar. The rats blew up the moon. Everything died. Then they all came back to life.
Is that really what happened?
Because of magic. Yes.
So, yeah.
The rat.
Skaven ruined it for everybody.
Skavens blew up the moon. The lizard folk escaped in a rocket. Everybody died, and the gods brought them back to life.
The Dark Elves won whatever the Dark Elves were trying to do. Whatever, bang their mom, resurrect their grandma, and bang her or something. Yeah. I don't know.
Warhammer Fantasy Battle World exploded, and then the gods were like, oh, but we like having you guys fight each other, so we're gonna keep having you guys fight each other, which it feels and sounds lazy, but a lot of people really like it. So I think a lot of that is just me being an angry Warhammer Fantasy Battle
I think
player.
the fact that it's backed by such dope models is kind of helps the medicine go down, you know.
Yeah,
what do you got here, Chuck?
Grace for sure.
Oh, he bought. You
might need to flip your. Oh, that's right. I remember when you showed that, Chuck. Yeah. So what Chuck is showing is an old set from Warhammer Fantasy Battles. I believe it had Lizardmen.
This was Lizardmen and Bretonia, all on sprue.
Yeah.
I haven't broken that open.
Oh, it's so good. That's so good.
Awesome.
Like $200. I couldn't believe I found that.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But yeah, so
I played the shit out of Mordenheim when I was like that. So that's what we did. We would do we were all in a Warhammer Fantasy Battle League. We would play Warhammer Fantasy Battle, and then we had the figures, like we had our Bits box figures that we had turned into Mordenheim teams, and we'd play Mordenheim. And then when we were done playing a round or two of Mordenheim, usually our buddy that liked 40K would come over, and then we would do like a 40K game or two. And that was like Saturdays for like a good chunk of the late 90s, early thousands. That's what we would do. We'd fantasy battle Mordenheim 40K.
So that's sort of how I got back into it. I found out that painting it can sort of help me with my Zen spot, because all I'm doing 100%. Is I'm concentrating on this little thing. I don't have to think about anything. I don't have as much time. Like my wife is off on a bachelorette party. I think the strippers are arriving soon down there in Arizona. Yeah. So
you finally get some silence.
Yeah, I get some silence. I get some extra time to paint this weekend. But yeah, it sort of helps with my mental health. Unfortunately, 100%. Like a lot of the big game nights at our local game store are in like nights that I want to spend with my wife. And you get to be my age and you realize that personal relationships mean a lot. And
100%.
You know, but yeah. I enjoy the lore, not the 30K lore. You can take Horus Heresy. Horus Heresy is a story of a sad boy who stands up to his father and gets spanked. Okay, now move on to 40K, where the interesting stuff happens.
It's Paradise Lost with laser guns.
Yeah.
And 100%. If you are familiar with Paradise Lost, it's really hard not to see Paradise Lost in a lot of the 30K stuff.
30K lore, to me personally, not a fan. Space Marines are already as vanilla as you get. So when you put Space Marines against Space Marines, and then I'm not a huge fan of demons. I like demons, but I'm not a huge fan. You throw a little bit of demons into the mix, then it's like, okay. But 40K, like you have, I'm all about aliens, right? You know, sci-fi aliens. So 40K is definitely the whole grim dark aspect that I'm looking for.
Yeah, I like the if you're looking at the non-codex lore, the books from the Black Library and all, I do not like the 40K books. Yeah, I've read the Kaldor and the Ultramarine stuff, and so yeah, it's a bunch of roided out superhuman guys bashing at each other. The books I like the Inquisitor books Any ones that deal with an Inquisitor, of course, the classic ones are, Eisenhorn and Ravenor. I know it's a little bit cheesy.
Listening to those right now.
But I love the Ciaphas Cain books. It's sort of like a tongue-in-cheek way of looking at the Guard, and it deals with a lot of Xenos and all. I like the smaller... I like books that have more relatable characters rather than... You can't relate to a Space Marine.
No. Yeah, it's difficult.
That's all of us kind of feel that way.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I read one Grey Knight book, and I was like, this is cool for, like, the epic power metal fantasy that it represents, like, going into a flaming demon church and, murdering your way through hordes of demons. Cool in one aspect, but the character's not relatable.
Yeah, I didn't even finish that book, and I've got a Grey Knight army. I got partway through it. The book that was good it's before the Custodes. The first Custodes book was pretty good because it really doesn't deal with Custodes. It deals with a guy on the Council of Terror, or the Council of No, I can never remember what that is. And it deals with one of the Sisters of Silence. And every once in a while it throws in a Custode talking about his stuff. There's little battle scenes, which is okay, because if you have like Custodes fighting demons, and it's even worse than like a Grey Knight or a Space Marine fighting demons. It's just not exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no fear of death. There's no impending doom that you're feeling when you hear like a guard, like 15 hours, where you're like, this guardsman is going to die.
Yeah.
This Custode, it's not going to die. He's going to kill this demon.
So I really liked in the Siege of Terra, they've been playing around a lot with one named Custode and one named Sister of Silence, and I can't remember their names. I think it's the one that everybody knows, the Custode everyone knows, like not Constance Valdor, but Anam or Annam something.
I think I read the first book in that.
Everybody knows.
Where the demons assault the gates.
Like Amon Ra or something like that?
Yeah.
I thought it was like a
it's
super
close
Egyptian
to that
sounding name.
It's close to that. But the way that Dan Abnett, honestly, because the two books that I've read 4 of them now, and the 2 that I've really enjoyed have been written by him. The way that he frames everything around them is very interesting. I like the idea that like the Sisters of Silence, the null personality, just it makes like you're sick looking at it. You can't focus on it. It's not that they're literally they're invisible. You can't see them because your mind doesn't want to acknowledge their existence. And I think that fact is super interesting. And the fact that there's a Custode and then her that are constantly like teaming up to take care of things out and about is a very interesting dichotomy. But at the same time, it's very obvious the way that the entire story that's being framed is that they're not going to make it through the books. Like neither one of them is going to survive the siege. It's way too plainly laid out that they're both doomed already.
I mean, that's kind of one of the trademarks of Abnett's books is that you get to love these characters and then eventually they get killed off.
They gonna die.
Because that's 40K in general, but it's specifically in his books, you always end up losing like your favorite character some way along.
So small tangent, just a quick question if you guys have. So they say when Custodes like retire or whatever, they go undercover as intelligence people out in the world. How does a 10-foot super soldier, genetically modified person become a spy for the Emperor out in the world?
Incognito.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a lot of walking on your knees.
They just pretend to be Ogren.
Was it like
a lot of walking on your knees?
It's like Thor from Ragnarok. It's like they'll know who you are. He's like, not if I do this.
Right.
Oh my God, man.
So
yeah.
Go ahead.
No. You got any other questions for Chac? Anything? So Chac, we're definitely going to have you back for a community spotlight.
Someplace where I can get this shine off my head here.
That's why Marky and I are wearing hats. It's fine.
Yeah.
I want to have like a good like hour of you just telling how the first games of Rogue Trigger went.
God, that'd be awesome.
Oh yeah,
like,
that was a long time ago, and I was usually drunk.
Right.
Well, I
just want a story time. I want story time.
One of the planets that we're going to cover when we do our planet spotlights is the McIntyre. What was the name? Like Arthur McIntyre 4? Or something. It's the planet is a dude's name.
And that's where
And I wanna
everything comes
cover-
from. I think the ambles come from it. I think
Yep.
Really?
Groks come from
Yeah.
it. Ambles come from it.
everything was just
a lot of the crazy shit.
yeah, it's like,
comes from
I think
it.
you're right. I think it's Arthur McIntyre 4 or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's some dude's name. The planet that Rogue Trader took place on was just some guy's name.
I mean,
Which is
leave it
such a
to a
funny-
rogue trader to be like, I'm going to name this planet after myself because I found it.
We were
It's the
battling on the planet George.
It was the fourth one we found, so it's 4. and that carried over. That's a huge Warhammer 40K. That's actually like, it kind of annoys me, but it's really enduring. Because it's like, oh, well, what planet were we on? We were on Keyboardius Prime. Oh,
Machiavelli 3.
okay. And what does Keyboardius Prime do? Oh, it trades with Keyboardius 4.
Yeah.
Okay. Like, did you run out of names? Like, but then again, you drive around the United States and there's always an Elm Street and there's always an Ash Street and there's always a Cedar Street and there's always Martin Luther King Boulevard and there's always a Fig. Like, there are so many streets that are just freaking everywhere. We're going to have Chalk back on a community spotlight. We're going to dive a lot more into your lore,
History.
the stuff that you're looking at developing and your current stuff. We'd love to talk to you about your knights, obviously, but this is a Lorus Obscurus episode. So we're going to steer into the spooky dookies. This is our second episode on Bigfoots. And if you guys don't mind, we had a user submitted story that I wanted to read before we get kicked off. Everybody cool with that?
Absolutely not. Who sent it?
Oh, okay.
Who sent it?
Semi did, man.
How dare you? How dare you send us a story that we have to read?
So Semi-Serious sent us another story. All right. First things first. He's given us an intro to everything. With the empath and emotions conversation that you guys talked about in the last Lorus Obscurus episode, I personally do a lot of meditation and energy control to self-regulate my emotions and sensations. And this helps me to relate myself to the things that are going on around me. He mentions whenever he goes into a room, he can generally get an immediate understanding of the mood of the room or the area and where the safest areas are in that room and where the best places to proceed with caution are. It's to a point where it's really extremely difficult for his friends and his family to be able to jump scare him or sneak up on him. His way of explaining it is that he was being able to spread out his energy in like a radius and understand the energy that comes in and interacts with that energy to the point where most of the time when it shifts due to someone trying to sneak up on me or when someone else suddenly becomes agitated or angered, there's like a little alarm bell that goes off in his head that says, hey, there's something different, so prepare yourself for it. I generally compare this to how flies or other birds can feel air shifts with their wings and are able to escape some possible danger that might be looming over them. I know it kind of sounds weird, but it is generally how I'm usually able to avoid spooky dooky stuff or possibly some dangerous encounters throughout my life. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
It goes back to that thing I was talking about where a lot of people who are kind of empathic or very emotionally connected usually developed it as a defense mechanism. I don't know if that's what you meant, Semi, but it kind of feels like you may have developed some stuff along the same ways just to basically kind of keep yourself a little more contained.
Yeah, I feel like almost, I don't want to say everybody, but I feel like a lot of people have that. You ever have that sense where you feel like someone's staring at you, and when you look behind you, it's like someone's trying to sneak up on you, almost like the hair stands up on your neck, or like you feel like a pressure or presence behind you or around you, where like, you know, you're not alone in a room.
Yeah.
So I get it.
He sent us 2 stories.
Sometimes
most of the stories I have, I'm sorry?
I was gonna say sometimes like the trippiest one, like sensing the pressure is, you know, somebody coming up behind you. Sometimes the trippiest one is when you know that you're coming up on somebody that you can't see yet. Like if they turn the corner and you walk to where they were standing and you're like, somebody was just here. Like that feeling trips me out the most.
Oh yeah. All right. So he's got 2 stories for us. One is a Bigfoots related story, and the other is a river monster story. The river monster story is a little one, but it's pretty trippy. I liked it. So most of the stories I have,
or a little story,
the little story, not a little monster. It's a big monster, but it's a dope little Like, what are those, like, 2-sentence horror stories? It kind of hit me that way because it's not very long when I was like, oh, it's creepy. So most of the stories I have mostly pertain to my siblings or other people I know compared to things that have happened to me directly. In Hmong culture, we have our own Bigfoot-like creature, except it's much more dangerous and a lot more terrifying. They tend to be more carnivorous and eat humans, whether it's through tricking them, hunting them, or catching them off guard, as they are incredibly smart creatures. They are called the Pinuvi. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. Described as giant ape-like creatures that lurk in the deep forests. Apparently, they're also able to shapeshift according to myths in my culture. But they're more known to shapeshift into prey that the Hmong would have hunted back in either Laos or Thailand. So they don't shapeshift into like people, but they might shapeshift into a deer or something else. I bring this up for a reason because as I was reading his story, I started thinking about things in my own culture. Growing up, I would constantly hear haunting stories of how hunters had certain rules they would always follow. While I do not know all of them, I do know that one of them was that if you shoot an animal and you knew that you hit it, but it hasn't fallen down or slowed its pace, it's strongly advised to give up and just walk away, as there's a chance that it's a Pinuvi. A lot of my younger cousins always compare this creature in terms of its description as the Hmong's version of Bigfoot. I also heard that there are 4 ways to possibly keep it at bay, which is fire, pepper, the smell of urine. However, the urine has to have come from the body of a shaman, and their body has to have been changed spiritually to where it could ward off these sorts of creatures, and the last one being the sun. This creature has been said to be incredibly smart, and during the day it mimics other creatures, but when night falls, it's easier for it to move around as it is nocturnal. This
Almost
explanation
like,
sums up a lot of what you need to know for this story that I'm going to let you guys know about next.
You know, say it's almost like the high quality H2O.
High quality. I'm sure if you were to search this creature's spelling, it might come up with other stories that have been posted online about it, and some might be written in the Hmong's converted written language, others might not be. So based on his comment here, I actually went and did a little bit of research. I found a couple of things that kind of supported the stuff that he just told us. The big explanation that I got from a Laotian, is that how I would say that? Laotian website was it is a shapeshifter which takes the form of a longor or long-tailed monkey that lives in the jungle. It is said to have a unique screeching cry that can be heard throughout the mountains and jungles. They make their entrances with loud cries along with a big gust of blowing wind. However, if you go hunting, you should not grill the intestines of your game because it will attract the Pinuvi. Rumors also say that if you shit out blood, then that means you're going to die because the Pinuvi is slowly fucking your intestines up. So from my experience, from my culture, a lot of this sounds a lot like skinwalkers, wendigos, and dogmen, which are...
Combined with a little bit of Montezuma's Revenge.
Yeah. Which are definitely cryptids and American Gothic monsters, but they're also Native American creatures that may or may not exist. We are going to, as we keep going with Lorus Obscurus, get into more of these heavy hitters. We're going to do a Wendigo episode. We're definitely going to do a Dogman episode, and we'll probably do a Skinwalker episode.
I've ever heard you bring up Dogman.
I have seen one. My fiance thinks I'm crazy, but I'm pretty sure there's one that claims part of this area. Because there's a couple of times that I've seen something standing in the middle of the street, especially like right during freshly fallen snow, and it's just staring at me. And then I go to like figure out where it is, and there's tracks, but they just vanish. Anyway, we'll get into Dogmen later. So back to Semi's story. So I heard this story from one of my older sisters. She said that this shaman was a distant relative that still lives in Laos to this day. One day he had been asked to go and heal somebody in a remote village that was high up in the mountains. It would take about a day and a half of travel by foot, I believe. He woke up early in the morning to start hiking up the mountain path. It was bright and sunny, so there really wasn't much for him to worry about until later in the day as the sun was beginning to set. Knowing this, he took some time to prepare for the night, where he would spend time camping and how he would build his campsite up in the mountains. He found a nice spot where he could build a small temporary shelter along with the fire. Knowing the possible dangers of the mountains, he was sure to gather most of the resources he thought he would need and kept them all close at hand. It turned out to be a rather quiet night, and he was able to enjoy his food in peace, at least for a little while. However, as soon as he was about to head off to bed and put out the fire, he saw a large shadow off in the distance, sitting just outside the farthest reaches of the fire's light. It was then that he stopped what he was doing and just sat back down and stared at the looming shadow, being sure to never take his eyes off of it. As an experienced shaman, he probably knew what the shadow was. Slowly, he took out some of the empty containers and a bunch of pepper to prepare to keep these things close at hand. He stayed up the rest of the night, staring the shadow down, feeding the fire throughout the night and occasionally throwing some pepper into the fire as well. He even took to peeing into the empty containers to keep the giant at bay as it sat there in the dark, waiting patiently in hopes that the man would eventually fall asleep. It was a grueling task, right, to stay awake throughout the night after such a long day of hiking up the mountain. However, he was just barely able to survive as he fell asleep for a moment as dawn was breaking and the light shone through the mountaintops. When he opened his eyes again, the giant shadow was gone from where it had sat in front of him. He quickly looked around his camp to ensure it was safe for him to leave before he packed up and left as fast as he could, doing the final stretch of the hike up the mountain. However, after he arrived at the village, he became ill as a sign of him meeting the Pinuvi. Another shaman said as the village elders would need to find or call another shaman up the mountain to heal him. So that goes back to the bit that I read where if you see one, it'll cause intestinal issues, which is interesting because that's one of those stories like halfway through where all the hair stands up.
Yeah, dude, so essentially the whole part about like when he was like, yeah, it's off in the distance, I was like, oh, okay, so it was kind of far, and it was just like just out of the fire, just out of the fire's lighting. I was like, oh, that's not far. that's not far at all.
So the next story
fire
he
would
has...
go far, but it's only like 10, 15 feet.
Yeah, I was gonna say like 10 feet.
20 if it's a big fire, and even then, that's about it.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's supposed to be like, the way that I imagined it was more like there's like zones. There's the zone you guys are talking about, which is like well lit by the fire. And then there's that next zone where everything's kind of murky. And then there's that next zone where everything's really hard to distinguish.
Yeah.
And in my mind's eye, I get it as that third zone out.
Yeah, where you can barely distinguish it from the background. But even that is still pretty close.
Yeah, that's still like 40 feet away. That's still like, it'll kill you real fast if you fuck up. The next story is about a possible river monster. When I was younger, my eldest brother, who was in the military, took some of my siblings to the beach in my town. This beach is a beach on a tributary river of the Mississippi. Although I wasn't there that day, I heard about the events afterward. My siblings all stayed in an area of the beach where there isn't really much of a current. But since my brother is a very good seasoned swimmer, he usually went out a lot further. He would, kind of swim out for exercise, I guess. As he swam out there, he said there was a moment when he stopped and decided just to kind of float and hang in the water. We've all been there. As he was floating, he said he felt the long and rough texture that rubbed up against his leg heading downriver. He also said that it was big enough to where it created its own current and kind of tugged him along on the water a little bit in the direction it was heading. He was petrified and stayed still for the time being and said he waited a bit after it had left before deciding to swim as fast as he could back to shore and calling out to his siblings that they immediately needed to leave.
Yeah, fuck that noise.
That is one of the worst things. When something touches your foot underwater, you're like, ugh. But yeah,
especially in the ocean.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, no doubt. So those are awesome. We definitely want to keep hearing your guys' cryptid stories and your ghost stories. Please send them to us. Normally at this point, before we jump into the main topic, we bring up any ghost stories or any paranormal stories, and we've all shared something. Chalk, you have not shared something. Okay. Do you have a spooky tale for us?
I do. I have two. Okay, so
right.
The first one is somewhat tame, somewhat not, depending on what you think about it. But so some of you guys know if you're on the Discord server, and if you aren't, you should go check that out. I'm a anthropology professor and an archaeologist, and I've spent a lot of time doing excavations down in Central America, primarily Belize. And we had this, it was our headquarters. It was not that old. The area that we were, nothing was older than 50 years, 50, 60 years old, because the jungle wasn't cleared until 1954.
Okay, got you.
This was a cement house. It was actually built by a drug runner. And
that was headquarters?
Yeah, it was his headquarters. He used to move mostly pot, also coke. His daughter came up one day and she went into our vault where we kept all the artifacts and bodies. And she said, this is the first time I haven't seen this filled with bales of coke. We think she meant bales of marijuana, but we're really not sure. We also know there's some guy, more or less, where there are a couple of competitors buried on the property. But we always had, when I was working there...
As you do.
Well, we had like 70 excavated human remains or partial remains in our vault when I was there.
Okay.
Just the way that the laws work in Belize, the government didn't want the actual human remains. We didn't want to be respectful for them. We excavated them under permit. This was, just to let you guys know, this is all done under the laws of Belize. Everything was good. I knew the director of archaeology. Everything's cool. But so we had these bodies down there. And we're like, well, what are we going to do? At some point, we're probably going to rebury them, but we didn't know.
Yeah.
So we had a lot of bodies, bones down there. But at night...
Okay, I was going to say, how degraded were these bodies?
Some of them were really good. So they're really good condition.
Like really good, really well preserved?
Really well preserved. Like, yeah, some...
Oh.
The best preserved one actually was probably not that old, but it wasn't buried with anything that, like, we didn't find any buttons or zippers or anything like that, but we don't think it was that old. But most of the ones...
To age it with?
So
there's like nothing to age it with or whatever?
Not wet or whatever, just, bones.
Okay.
But
so I was going to say, Chac, when you're... Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but it is super interesting. So when you're digging...
Yeah.
Like, I'm thinking Jurassic Park, you got a little mini brush, and you're like, oh, my hand just, brushed across this 50-year-old hand. Is that kind of how it's going?
Yeah,
or is it like, oh,
you usually start
I lift my
out
pickup
with...
and there's a hand on the
Okay, so there was this one time
like
as somebody, as a student, pulls up their pick, and I swear to God, it had a piece of a skull on it. So yeah, sometimes we find burials that way, but usually if a burial's going to survive in the conditions where we were, they're in a more of a formal,
permanent,
not really burial. Like a tomb, but there'd be, you can sort of tell when you're coming up on one, like, there's going to be a burial and that's going to be a lot of paperwork, but we might find some cool stuff.
Not everything's like surprise, like finger.
No, I have found surprise fingers. Literally surprise fingers before. I have found bodies in locations that they're not supposed to be in, and that's caused a problem. There's whole other stories I could tell you about some of these excavations, but usually the burials were fragmentary. Sometimes they're in quite good shape, so we could tell, sex and age and maybe some physical problems that they had, but a lot of times they're just fragmentary. Wow. But so there are times... And this wasn't like a spooky field house. And I spent a decade there. So it's not like you go in and you've never been there before. But there are times, and I'm not the only one that found this, where you'd be there alone and you'd hear people walking on the floor up above you, but there was nobody else in camp. And you'd hear doors open. We'd know when doors were open, they'd been closed. The doors that had been closed had been open. Furniture that had been moved, that sort of thing. And we just said, well, nobody seems to be getting harmed by this, so we just have some sort of ghost poltergeist activity. And if it was an ancient Maya, if it was a drug runner's victims, we don't know. There wasn't a lot of violence. I was in a Mennonite area, but they tended to take care of their own problems sort of in-house, if you get my meaning. They didn't like to go to the Belizean authorities. So I actually do know where there are bodies buried that aren't ancient.
So you're saying Mennonite, like Amish Mennonite, like kind of the same thing, right?
Except these are sort of reformed, so they do use power tools and cars and all that. But yeah, Amish Mennonites.
Oh,
yeah,
interesting.
They were a big drug transshipment point back in the 70s, 80s, 90s.
I mean, growing crops is growing crops.
Amish just out there whacking people.
Those stories are for another time. But the really spooky story. So I moved into the house where I am now. Well, that house has burned down, but we rebuilt. We're on the same property. And we had two neighbors. The neighbor right next to us, her husband.
I like how calm he was about that.
It happened in 2017. I've really gotten over it. Northern California, lots of fires. So, but
it's just the haunted house burned down, and you're okay. And you've that's where I'm coming from.
So our neighbor next door, her husband was sick and was in the hospital, and we weren't really thinking about it. We knew he didn't have much time left. And I checked the clock when this happened. I was woken up by our doorbell ringing at 12:03, 3 minutes after midnight. And I checked the clock because I was asleep. By somebody ringing the doorbell, woke my wife up and all, went to the door with an equalizer because it was after midnight, and opened up. There was nobody there. And I don't live on a street with kids where anybody's doing ding dong ditch, and my property's set back from the street a little bit, up a rather long driveway. There was nobody there. It's a dark street, nothing. I'm like, well, that was really fucking weird. Close the door.
Yeah.
Next day, I'm talking to our other neighbor, not the neighbor who had the sick husband, but the neighbor like one more house away, and she's like, John died last night. I'm like, oh, that's so bad. It's like, yeah, it happened just after midnight. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, just a couple of minutes after midnight. And he was really good friends with the husband of the widow of the house that we bought the house from. And we figured that he came to say goodbye to his friend.
Wow.
That's the best thing that we can figure out that happened.
Okay.
I'd freak me out, but
I mean, it's better than he hated the neighbor and he came to say "fuck you."
Say goodbye.
Yeah. We never had anything else.
Man.
That was just at one point. I mean, I've encountered other sort of like spooky stuff in the jungle, but the jungle is spooky at night when it's raining and all.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, it's just that's just the jungle.
Yeah, it's just given that that's
jungle is all kinds of spooky.
And I have spent like nights and like being out basically alone in the jungle, and you get sort of this weird feeling. It's not the noises that you hear; it's when the noises stop.
Yeah, it's the silence.
That
there's something out there.
The moments of silence.
And it's like, is that a jaguar? Or is that something else?
It's when you're sitting there and then you hear your own breath.
Yeah.
You know, like you're sitting there because you don't normally hear yourself breathing.
Right.
You know, but when you're sitting there and then all of a sudden you hear.
Well, because it goes
like,
quiet.
Oh fuck!
You're like, am I
loud,
loud?
You know, 99% of the time, except then when there's a predator, all of a sudden, and everything wants to shut up.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, you're like,
that's always my favorite.
I'm the last one to notice.
Monkeys are fucking screaming, but like the second you're in trouble, they shut the fuck up. And you're like, yeah, now you shut up.
Thank God, there's finally some peace. And wait a minute,
yeah, motherfucker.
So yeah, I as Semi brought up with his story about the Pinot V, and as we talked about last episode a little bit with the Yeti and a couple of different other things, there's obviously apes, monkeys everywhere. And Chac, I know that you had some responses to our armchair anthropology.
Yeah, bonobo, I get it. I knew what it was called. I just couldn't remember it.
Okay, it was so. This was sort of in response to Tom's idea about there being a sort of a native Bigfoot in the Americas, and I want to go. So I am an anthropology professor. I've taught physical anthropology. I don't teach anymore, so I don't have to worry about like digging a professional grave by saying this sort of thing. I'm not discounting the Bigfoot at all. I think there's a fair amount of evidence out there to make it a possibility. I've spent enough time in the forest and in the jungle that I know that there's room for things to be living. And one of the things people always say is, well, we've never found any bones. And it's like, do you know how many deer and bear and everything are out in the woods?
Mhm.
How often do you come across skeletons of all these animals?
And
Show me
Well,
the
yeah, I
body.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like fossilization, right? Like finding fossils
Yeah.
and shit, that's like 2%.
It's not even
chance
2%.
that you're gonna
That's,
turn it, right?
that's
Well,
way
'cause it has
high.
to get like,
Yeah.
because
Right? Like,
fossils
it
are
is-
technically like calcium deposits that replace the bones. They're
Yeah,
not
it's
actually
mineralized
bones themselves.
bone.
Yeah. Like the chances of that happening are minuscule.
Yeah,
There's too many
basically,
things
an
going
animal to
on
be
in those locations,
fossilized,
right?
an animal has to die and sink to the bottom of, like, usually it's like a shallow body of water, and then it's then almost immediately covered by a mud flow. So it's sort of preserved there, and then slowly in mineral-laden waters, the mineral, you know how you get hard water deposits on your coffee pot or whatever?
Yeah.
Basically what happens is the minerals in the water deposit on the bones and replace the calcium with other minerals. And then so you end up with a rock that's shaped like the bone. And it's even shaped like the interior of the bone and all, because it replaces all the little structures. But that is really,
bone
really
bits.
rare.
Right. So yeah, so I mean, like with what you're saying, like, yeah, finding bones, we never found it. It's like, yeah, dude, the freaking chances of that are freaking minuscule. You know?
Nature is
Well, a
very
lot of-
good at cleaning up after itself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lots of predators eat. Lots of predators exist for the niche of eating dead things. If you look at, it's called whale fall when a whale dies. And it floats to the surface. The sharks feed on it. It gets to a certain point where it sinks, and it sinks all the way down. And through every layer of water that whale carcass floats through, there's an entire microcosm of animals that exists just to eat that, which is why we
clean up
don't
after.
find that many whale bones, because they get eaten constantly. We
And
find
it's
whale
mostly
bones when they wash up
bugs.
on shore.
Or they
And
go all the
little
way to the bottom.
Predators. So
Yeah, them little sea bugs.
So the idea that Tom came up with is, well, which a lot of people say is it's Gigantopithecus. Well, honestly, we really don't know much about Gigantopithecus. We've got like 4 jaw bones and a couple of hundred teeth. That's it. People like it
Holy
because
crap.
it's a big ape, but it's most probably related to orangutans, and that doesn't really fly with how Bigfoot is supposed to walk in the cast that we have and all. Now, there are no apes that are indigenous to the Americas at all. We have monkeys, but monkeys and apes are completely different.
We have monkeys up here?
Actually,
In
monkeys
North America, the Americas.
South-
in the Americas, North
South.
America, yeah, Southern Mexico,
Yeah.
that's
Okay.
North America. Central
But
America,
we don't have.
And weren't
we don't
the,
have. a
we don't have them
primordial redwood
up in the
monkey.
United States.
Currently, but
Currently,
like,
but
didn't
we have
used
in the
to have
past.
most of the species,
I mean,
Like,
I went to the zoo
all the
last
South
week.
American species. I thought most of them
Marky's like, you guys
resided
are
in
wrong.
North
They're-
America as well until
Guys.
they were chased out by the predators from
Yeah.
like post ice age, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
And we
get it,
did.
Kevin,
And
but I
of
went
course,
to
a
the
lot
zoo
of the stuff in
last
South
week,
America,
so-
they had a lot of marsupials down there and like big killer birds and all sorts of really neat stuff. But we didn't have the primate. The apes are basically Africa and Asia. All right, so that's cool. No problem. Humans didn't evolve in the Americas either. So humans
Right.
came in several waves. Some of them were by boat, but a lot of what they did is they walked along during the ice age, the level of the sea level was lower. So the sea level was lower. That exposed more coastline. So why don't we have evidence of the early people in the Americas? Because it's all under the ocean right now. We have found some like fire rings and all that are underwater, but it's really hard to like find these really sort of ephemeral sites like a campfire. They're not building things, right? And it's along the coast. We do have examples of that in the English Channel where there are actually villages that were built and that we found the remains of villages and all in the English Channel underwater.
Well, there's that whole portion that not even, I mean, like a long time ago, because the way that we perceive everything in the context of our lives. But geologically speaking, not that long ago, there was an entire other land next to England called like,
it begins with an F.
It's all underwater now.
Yeah. And that's where the English Channel is and part of the North Sea and all that. So the same thing happened in the Americas. And what people did is basically they didn't walk along the ice-free corridor from Siberia through Alaska and all. That was probably pretty barren. What they did is they probably walked along the coast, fished, foraged, the whole thing right along the coast, down through the Pacific Northwest and all. Well, if people can walk there and other animals can walk there, why can't some indigenous hominid, great ape, do the same thing and take the same route that humans took? Now, we do know not that too long ago, as far as we're talking about geologically human history. So we know that Neanderthals and humans interbred. Neanderthals went extinct probably around 35,000 years ago. But there were also the Denisovians. I always get pronounced that wrong. That interbred with humans, and there was one or two other hominid species. So they're all related Homo sapiens. I do not go with as Neanderthals as being a separate species. I tend to talk about them being Homo sapiens neanderthalensis. So they're more of a type of human. And then we had the Homo sapiens Desnovians.
An abhuman.
Yeah. Abhuman.
Sort of. Yeah. And there are also several other also hominids that interbred with different human populations during the time. Maybe even going even further back. There's some evidence I won't go into right now. But so we had all these other hominins kicking around at the same time that we had humans. And we don't know when they went extinct, nor do we know how big these populations were. And so it's perfectly possible that something else, going with the stories of Yeti that go back quite a long ways in Asia, and the other, you had the one we just talked about here in Laos, another variety of hominid that followed humans to the New World. And that's why we have these stories all over the place. There's a fair amount of evidence. There are very few actual professional anthropologists that are willing to go out on a limb with this. There's one. The reason I spaced out earlier is I was looking up his name. His name's, if you want to, Jeffrey Meldrum. But just look up anthropology professor, Idaho, Bigfoot, and you'll come up with his name. And he's got about 300 casts. He's been of footprints. And some of the ones I've seen do not look like what your average person would do to fake a Bigfoot track, because they actually look real. They look like how human feet work.
Oh, he has a listed.
They like pressure as it walks.
And you see like ridges. Some of them have, we are the apes and us are the only species that have fingerprints and footprints. We have footprints too. If you look at our toes, that. So some of these casts have impressions of those, not just the lines that you have here, but actual like fingerprints, but on the toes. So they're really there. There are some questions. There've been some trying to do a DNA from scat or hair. They come back either non-testable or unknown. I've run a bunch of ancient DNA, and a lot of times it just doesn't come out. I've actually never, out of about 50 ancient DNA samples I've run, I've never had one come back as being able to tell me anything. So they just could be
interesting,
too degraded to replicate, or it could be, well, yeah, we've got DNA, we just don't know what it is because it's not on our catalog.
There's no point of reference. So
there's no point in reference for it.
That guy Jeffrey is the one that I was talking about, how he went out with that other guy. It was just like, oh yeah, no, this looks legit. He's like, it looks like something I can't explain.
Yeah,
like he wasn't like, Bigfoot's here. He was just like, that's some shit.
Yeah.
You know, like he's like, this is new.
Yeah, it's a possibility. And that's what I've even told my students that listen, there's a lot of room up there and we don't know everything that's going on. If it's a small population or a series of small populations, it's possible something could be out there. Let's generously say I dated the wife of a professional Bigfoot hunter. So if you parse that all out, it was not one of my proudest moments, although, because they were still married at the time. But she told me some of her husband's stories. He was actually, it gets worse. She was my student in Belize while he was tracking the elusive Belizean Bigfoot, which is called the Sisimito. It's probably actually from Nahuatl being Zizimito, something like that. It's got a lot of T's and Z's in it in the Nahuatl language.
So they've got their own. How is theirs different?
It's a distant relative of.
Well, their feet are on backwards for one thing.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It comes from folklore, but basically it's a hairy sort of person that's bigger than a regular person, which sounds like a lot of, whether you want to call it Bigfoot, swamp ape, Sasquatch, they all basically they smell really bad. They are larger than an average person. Of course, if you're talking about the Maya population, they're not that tall to begin with. But so they're taller than the average person, hairy. I don't know. I'm pretty hairy myself, but hopefully I don't.
You're
smell
describing
that.
me right now.
I was gonna say I got a friend like that.
You're describing me right now, sir.
And
I am targeted.
There's just enough folklore around the world with these small elusive populations and enough, I don't know if you call it evidence, but there's enough stuff out there that is not easily explained that I'd give it a solid possibility. I'm not going to say that they exist for sure. And of course, you get things where people who are not used to the outdoors come across something and it's a perfectly normal explanation. One of the best examples is, I don't know if you guys remember back in the day when MTV still mostly showed music videos, they had a couple of reality TV shows, and one of them was in an RV. I can't remember what it was called.
Road Rules.
Road Rules. They actually had Road Rules Belize. And they went down to Belize and they were parked. I actually know the area that they were parked. I actually know exactly where they were parked. And in the middle of the night, there's all this commotion and banging and cries and all. They freaked out and they're like, it's a jaguar, it's an unknown, it's a Bigfoot, and they like packed up and rolled out of there really fast. Well, it was monkeys. They were howler monkeys. These things are sort of annoying. Not as bad as spider monkeys. Spider monkeys will drop branches on you. I don't mind them throwing.
Howler monkeys, like,
they're
if
big.
you don't know what that noise is, it is horrifying.
It is
my brother was like basically on a patrol and he'd never been on one, out there before, and he's going through and they've got him on point and he's chopping through the jungle, and he's like, "What the fuck is that?" And they're like, "Don't worry, just keep going." Just keep going.
Yeah.
And he's like, "What do you mean just keep going?" And they're like, "Just keep going. Don't stop. It's after us." He's like, "What is it?" like that's because they said, if you don't know what that is, it is horrifying.
It is. Now, I have heard some stories from people who, I spent, when I was in Belize and in Central America, I was not like working for the CIA or anything like that, but I did meet some interesting people. And one of the guys that I met, he was retired and he lived out on Ambergris Caye. At the time, it wasn't like it is now. It wasn't as touristy as it is now. It was a small place. I'm sure some of you know who the Gurkhas are. So he was a retired Gurkha. And back when Belize was only gained its independence in, I think it was 81. Still a Commonwealth country. And as soon as they gained their independence, Guatemala said, Belize doesn't exist. It's always been part of Guatemala. The English stole it from us like they stole everything else. Doesn't matter that Guatemala didn't exist at the time that British Honduras was founded. And they were like, we're going to roll across the border, and Guatemala exists from the Pacific to the Atlantic. And so Belize was still a Commonwealth country. And so it ended up being a training ground for the Gurkhas. It ended up being a training ground for the SAS, I would meet a lot of people from the Royal Scottish Guard, the Scottish Highland Guard. And one of the guys I knew was a Gurkha. And he used to do interesting things across the border into Guatemala, which we won't go into. But he would talk about that there were times...
Allegedly,
right.
Yeah, right.
There were times that the jungle scared him. This guy did not scare. Just did not scare. Now, I'm not saying he did not scare easily. Yeah. I'm just saying, if you know anything about the Gurkhas, they do not scare at all. And he talked about how spooky the jungle was and how there were things out there that he didn't know what was happening and didn't understand. So, I mean, there's stuff out there. And we're not talking a jaguar. We're not talking a howler monkey. We're not talking whatever. We're talking about spooky dookie stuff that's unknown. And, a lot of people, if you spent time up in the Pacific Northwest, you've run across some of this stuff too. You move out to more out where you are now, Ryan, you move out to Appalachia and all that, and you don't go into the woods at night. You just don't. People there say you don't go into the woods at night. And you find things like, you have the knot deer and you've got the skinwalkers. Yep. And
I was going to say not deer are a big thing.
Well, what you talked about, maybe the dog thing that you were talking about, it's like, it looks like a dog, but it doesn't act like a dog. What is it? Well, it's not a dog. It looks like a deer, sort of, but it doesn't act like a deer, and it looks a little weird. What is it? I don't know, but it's not a deer.
Yeah.
There's deer that horrify the fuck out of me that are on an island off the coast of England, northern England, near Scotland, where they've put the people who settled on the island brought these deer over for game, and the deer and the sheep, that they were living on this island, they were deficient in a type of vitamin, and they kept finding these dead birds everywhere. Like birds without heads. They were half eaten, and they were like, what predator is out here? It's the fucking deer. The deer and the sheep were actively hunting and eating fowl around the island because they were eating for the calcium or whatever the fucking vitamin that they were missing to resupply themselves.
It's not just
if you think about no, exactly. No, it's just, this is one I know.
Yeah.
Life finds a way.
Well, but that's the thing is if you're looking at these places, especially in remote regions, where these things are, where these creatures are, they could be very normal creatures, but they're doing shit that you're like, why is it doing that?
Right.
Like if a fucking walrus was in the forest and it was climbing a tree, you're like, that shouldn't do that. But it's well, it's been there for 100,000 years.
Yeah, I saw a video last week of this deer, and it was looking at another deer, and it was walking up to it almost territorial, right? And it charges the deer, and the deer's head falls off.
Oh, is it one of the fake deer stands?
And it freaked out and ran away.
Yeah, the other deer's all, ah!
Yeah, he's like, oh shit.
What's the whole, you have the uncanny valley. And that could go into, we talk about all these in the Americas, especially in the US, and in Canada, we have all this folklore that sort of falls into the uncanny valley. And why are we scared of it? We've got the Wendigo, we've got the skinwalkers, we've got all this sort of thing, we've got Bigfoot. But the thing that they all have in common, one of the things, is that they're all basically bipedal, human-like, but not human.
Yeah.
And we're scared of them. So are we actually seeing 10 different things? Or are we just seeing one thing? For me, it makes a lot more sense that there's just one thing. And
well, we talked about that on another podcast where like humans are just naturally afraid of anything that is human-like, because we don't have much out there,
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the reason for the uncanny valley. It's the explanation for the uncanny valley in a lot of ways.
So here's what I'm getting from Chac, right? He totally agrees with me 110% that there is a hominid in the United States. He unequivocally believes those things that I'm right? And believes that apparently it was formed from a monkey that followed us up the coast fishing. So good job. I think we
there you go. Pretty close, except for the unequivocal. I'll give it a soft. But pretty much. Probably not Gigantopithecus. Probably
no, from a monkey.
Else.
You were saying, right? Like
no, it would be an ape. It would be everything. So monkeys are one. They're not that big. Apes can get quite big, and they don't really walk upright. This is the whole big thing where we really fall into a problem.
Yeah,
it is the walking upright. So like chimpanzees, if you look at the great apes, so all great apes can walk upright. Right, chimpanzees, bonobos, even orangutans, gorillas, they all can. It's very hard because their knees and hips aren't formed in the right way for them to do it. So this isn't an ape in that sense. If we have a Bigfoot, it actually has to be related to our direct line going back to like Australopithecus, because this is where we had the real break with our lineage started walking upright and is optimized for walking upright. We don't have any stories of Yeti or Sasquatch or anything around the world where they're doing quadrupedal or digigrade, sort of like walking on their, like how gorillas do. They always walk upright. They don't swing through trees. Well, they're too big for that. But they walk upright. So it has to be part of our lineage. And where that broke apart, we don't really know. Now, the Gigantopithecus is not part of our lineage. I think it's probably related to an orangutan. But when they do everybody's just guessing, because like I said, all they've got is teeth and a jawbone. They don't have skeletal material. So they're like, well, it's a really big primate and it's an ape. We could tell it's an ape because the number of teeth it has. Monkeys have different numbers of teeth than apes do. Okay. And it's big. That's all we know. We don't know if it was bipedal. We don't know. I mean, it's like, well, the jaw sort of looks like an orangutan jaw.
Yeah.
But what does that mean?
Yeah, I just love it how, I deal with humans, and I've done human evolution. But when it's like we've got like one of the ancestors that we know interbred with humans, maybe 30,000 years ago, maybe 10,000 years ago, the Desnovians, we had like a finger bone. You can't tell what somebody. You're like, well, this is what they look like. It's like, we had a finger bone. Okay, we don't know exactly what they look like.
We look like Kevin.
Pretty
we have
much
photographic proof of that.
But yeah, so
photographic proof.
I'm not discounting Bigfoot at all. And they're a protected species up in Washington. You can't shoot one. You break the law.
Is that really like where they're at?
Yeah.
I think we need to get Kevin to update, at least on the Discord, the photo of him with his descendants from Stonehenge.
Me with my great ancestor from Stonehenge, yeah.
Yeah, dude.
So yeah, it was great. When I was at Stonehenge, there was actually a statue. They had found a skeleton of somebody buried there. And for some reason, the facial reconstruction, DNA, and everything, they were like, okay, based off his DNA, his hair color and everything would look like this. And I walk in there, I'm like, damn, this looks a lot like myself.
Yeah.
And I turn around, and there's just a line of cameras pointed at me from all these people that I've never seen before, coming from all these different countries in the museum here at Stonehenge. And I'm like...
He's reincarnated.
That's
Yeah.
pretty funny.
Yeah, no, dude, like the picture, like
My good side.
he joked about it. He's like, "Yeah, check out this picture," and I'm like, "Holy fuck!" It is shocking how much he looks like. I did the same thing.
In a museum.
I did the same thing at the zoo where they have the gorilla like with its arms out, and I was like, "I wonder," and I put my arms out, and they're like almost there. You know, like people were like, "Oh, this was back when I had like a fro, I had like super long hair." I must have been in like 13 photos, like at that point, because they're like, "Oh my god, like I'm way taller," but I definitely had like the arm reach for it.
Yeah, but
But
people have no idea. Like, go and actually just look at a chimpanzee and see how big a male chimpanzee is. These are not small animals.
yeah,
They're
that's
scary.
what I'm saying, man. Like they're
scary.
in
scary.
relation to like each other and giant trees, and they're always kind of hunched over.
Yeah, you think they're
but
small?
like, yeah, but when they stand up, they're big.
Yeah.
Well,
and,
it's just
and,
like,
like people
and
keep them as
ripped.
pets, and they freaking
'Cause they're
rip
morons.
people's faces off.
Carol
I mean, like,
Baskin.
Carol,
Carol fucking
The,
Baskin.
Carol fucking Baskin.
Their
Well,
muscles.
they do it. Planet of the Apes. Go ahead, Chuck.
I was just going to say that the way their muscles attach, where their muscle attachment points are, give them a much stronger mechanical advantage per
Yeah,
unit of strength, like per unit of
Right,
like
right.
muscle
Per pound
being
of
able to
muscle,
do.
they have mechanical advantage.
Yeah, it's
That's cool.
about leverage. Screw ripping off somebody's
Design
face. You probably
advantage.
rip off somebody's arm.
oh yeah, and beat
That's
you.
the Wookiee
Monkeys
win.
together. Monkeys together, strong.
Monk
Well,
high
In,
together strong.
The
It's-
Planet of the Apes movies. I don't know if you guys have ever seen any of those ones, the new ones that they made.
yes,
They're
new
really
ones are
good.
fantastic.
Like, I mean, the last one, but they're really good. But they have like where, you know, like Caesar like hugs fucking what's his face, you know, and people are like, "Oh, it's not realistic. It's so much bigger." It's like, no, James Franco is actually pretty short. And chimpanzee is actually a lot bigger than you think. Like,
Yeah.
yes, of course the size is off because it's all CG, but it's not crazy off.
I mean, they're
Right.
small. Their
Like-
skulls are only like this big,
Yeah,
but our skulls are only like
but they
this
got
big.
broad ass shoulders. Like,
But I was gonna say, but their bicep is probably about the same size.
yeah. There's a picture of one chimp. I think it's a chimp.
Bigger.
I think it's a chimp that it's like hairless
Yeah.
for
I've
some
seen
reason.
that.
And you look at that fucking thing and you're like, oh, you know, like it's
I know
not like
exactly
seeing
the
a
picture you're
shaved.
talking about.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
not
it
like
looks
seeing
like
a
the rip.
shaved bear. Yeah, like you look at a shaved bear and you're like, ew. Looks
Oh,
like
is it
a
bad?
What looks like a sack.
It's like a polar bear, right? When
Yeah.
it's wet.
No.
is it?
This one was a picture of a black bear that like had lost its fur, and I swear to God, it just looked like a big rat.
Like a big naked mole rat.
Yeah, basically. And then you
Ew.
look at this like chimp, and you're like,
You're like,
One of
yeah,
the-
he fucks.
One of the things that I think is super funny is there's a meme going around. I'm sure it's old, but there's a meme going around recently that said, "If I wasn't supposed to want to cuddle bears, why do they look like this?" And then it's like their pictures of their ears and pictures of their nose and everything. And I'm like, when you put it that way, they do look really cuddly. I
Yeah.
know they
Yeah.
can rip me apart though. So
Yeah.
So there's actually I forgot where it is, but there's a whole like article that I had read like fucking decades ago. Back when I went to the caverns here in California where they have that like giant sloth. You know what I'm talking about?
right, yeah,
They had talked about, someone had said like this wild idea about the whole Bigfoot actually being related to the bear family and it being some type of ancient descendant of like a short-faced bear.
Huh.
And I was like, I don't believe that. That sounds like complete bullshit, but that would be dope. Like,
Yeah.
can you imagine like a freaking like bipedal bear that like has intelligence like that? Like, oh,
That'd be nice.
I mean,
right?
it sounds into like it. So that's
I
that's
think
the
that's a
thing.
man bear pig.
Yeah, there you go.
There's a man bear pig.
So that's something that I thought about, Chuck, when you were talking earlier. Was a lot of times we're dealing with Lorus Obscurus. This particular series that we do it because we love horror stuff and we love spooky stuff and we want to get into it, and that's the creation point. That's the launch pad. But we also do it because we've all had weird experiences. And I honestly believe that most humans have had weird experiences, but there's that skeptical range. And I think that a lot of people, when they get introduced to the idea of the paranormal, they get introduced to the idea of cryptids, they get introduced to these ideas, they have a tendency to immediately try to put themselves on the spectrum, if you will, the skeptical spectrum. And a lot of people seem to fall to the extreme end of skepticism where they outright deny it because they don't want to put themselves into a position where they're saying, well, possibly.
Yeah.
We have, as a culture, we have a fear of going, well, maybe. We don't like to put ourselves in the well, maybe bucket. And I think that I feel like that's the side that I'm on. Actually, I'm probably a little further out at this point, but the well, maybe
you're on the I'll try anything once.
I feel that I have a healthy outlook on skepticism. For instance, I saw this thing standing in the middle of the street when I was shoveling snow. So for those of you who have only seen snow as a fun romantic thing, when it snows, when it snows more than a couple of inches, you go out and shovel at 2 a.m. because you know that by 9 a.m. it's going to be a fucking massive pain in the ass. So one of the nights I was pre-shoveling and I went out at like 11 o'clock and I was just shoveling the driveway so I could get my snowblower and stuff out the next morning. And I was about halfway through and I got that really, really, and we're all familiar with it. Everybody here is familiar with it, but I'm sure everybody listening is probably familiar with it too, is that I got that feeling that something was watching me. I knew for a fact that there was something out in the snow with me and that it was watching what I did. So I stopped what I was doing and I kind of, I looked around. I continued to what I was doing, but I looked around. I did that like hunter's gaze. And if you've ever been hunting, when you think that there's something following you, you don't stand upright, whirl around quickly and go, hey, because then the thing that you're hunting runs away. You kind of find a way to direct your sight. So I did that. And as I came around the edge of the garage, I saw a man standing in the middle of the street whose head looked wrong. He was standing wrong. He was kind of like, he was too spread out. His arms were way too low. And there was just something off about his head. And it took me a minute of looking at him because I assumed it was like my neighbor, my across the street neighbor in like snow gear or whatever. It took me a minute to realize that the reason that he looked odd is that his head looked wrong. And when I came to that realization and took a couple of steps towards him, my view, based on the way that there's basically a walkway that goes down. There's a narrow walkway down one side of my garage on the property line that I share with my neighbor. And then on the other side, there's a really big like pass through. So there's like, you can get a bike through on here. You could get a couple of cars through on here, sort of breakdown. And as I was moving up towards the street to see what it was, my neighbor's privacy fence blocked the view of the street for a second, like not even that long. And when I cleared the rest of the way, there was nothing there. And so immediately I was like, your brain's playing tricks on you, whatever. So I continued shoveling. Well, I had to shovel down the driveway to the street, and that's where it was. And when I got to the end of the driveway, there were tracks in the middle of the street. There were tracks that walked straight up the center of our street, stopped where I saw it, and then there were no tracks leading away. So either it turned around and used its own tracks to get away, or something else. And that's when it struck me that I thought, and I was like, oh shit, I saw a Wendigo. And the reason that my mind went to Wendigo is because culturally speaking, that's what we call it. That's the Native American name, especially on a snowy, cold night. Wendigos, to lay it out really quickly, because we'll cover them in more detail later, Wendigos can change shape. Wendigos oftentimes are not a deer. If there's a deer not acting like a deer and it's making noises that sound like it's trying to entice you into the forest or something like that, don't follow it. It's going to fucking eat you. That's a Wendigo.
I mean, you got to make some pretty enticing noises for me to follow you.
So if you ever hear a baby crying, if you're ever
Nope.
in this part of the world and in this part of the United States and you hear a baby crying in
Nope.
midnight, do not get up and go find it. It's not a baby.
Free sour candy, Mark. Free sour candy.
If
It's gotta be a
there's
free
a dude,
blowjob or something.
if there's a dude in the middle of the street that looks like an undead, that looks like a guy wearing the carcass of a deer on its upper body, and he's offering you free fidget spinners, walk the other way. That's all I'm saying. But
How much is a ZJ?
so
I have to ask. You can't afford it.
I did a little bit of research, and I found out that we don't have Wendigo here. We have dogmen here, but they're very similar. That dogmen just don't eat people. They fuck with people. They like teasing people. They come into urban areas and they tease people. But we'll get into all this stuff in a future episode. But I suffice to say, I'm not convinced that all of these things are the same thing, but I am convinced that only a limited number of them exist. Like I imagine a skinwalker and a Wendigo are probably the same.
Yeah.
A dogman might be Yeti. It might be another form of skunk ape or Sasquatch. Like I definitely think that there's a couple of different species, and I also think that there's stuff that I personally believe that there are entities out there that exist that are more than natural, that are supernatural, that are out to.
I was
get
gonna say,
us
what if they're
in
like
a way.
demons or the like?
Well,
Yeah.
I was just going to talk about, bleeding over from other dimensions. There's the whole, then you're starting to get into the whole UFO culture about that, with multiple dimensions and people things coming over from other dimensions. That's a whole nother topic, and all the releases that the government's now doing of their UFO sightings and all, and because they're priming the pump. They're priming the pump when they do the big release and tell us that UFOs
so
are
it's
real.
not as big of a culture shock when they're like, so aliens have been real for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
This is Gridneck.
Rigneck.
Yeah, this is Gridneck. He's here to enslave us all. All right.
What was that?
And we're gonna listen to him.
I wonder what they're chanting. Turn on your universal translator.
Yeah.
Rock.
Yep. To serve man. Anybody familiar with that? Chuck probably knows what I'm
Oh,
talking
yeah.
Yeah, I know what I'm talking about. What you're talking about.
Way back. So I just looked up. So I guess the dogman goes, it's fairly widespread. So
Yes, but
all the way out to
it's
Midwest. It's all the way through
yeah, it's
Minnesota.
a Midwest one.
Interesting.
There's a lot of stuff in American Gothic. There's a lot of stuff with American cryptids that we are just barely scratching the surface. And it's cool because, Chac came on today and has shared with us some of his experiences and some of his knowledge as far as different countries go. Obviously, Semi shared some experience with us about his culture's experience and all of that. So it obviously, the more of these layers that we peel back, the more that we're going to get. We're not 100% done with Bigfoot. We've got one more episode where we're going to talk a little bit about Bigfoot hunting.
Yes.
But not a lot of 40K content coming off the end of this episode. We normally try to compare our creatures.
Yeah, you got plenty on the front end.
But you got some on the front end, and obviously, like all of this stuff, that this anthropological, right? I said that right?
Yeah, anthropological.
It's pronounced anthropical.
Anthropical. All this anthropical data.
This their anthropology.
All of this information that Chac just shared with us, these are those building blocks that we pull from as creative writers, that you pull from as a creative writer. Always try to base it on, if you're not going to base it on something that like a movie, like we just covered in the last two episodes, movies for ideas, base it on history, base it on science, base it on things that actually
Cryptids.
exist, or mix both of those together. Here's a cool concept from a movie. Here's some anthropological data for this. Okay, so now I'm going to play around with
Some foot.
maybe there's a Yeti, Yeah, some foot. There's a Yeti creature that exists on your homeworld, on your guard's homeworld. Maybe that's what your guard use as their heraldry. It's a Yeti, and maybe it's got 3 limbs. Maybe it's got an arm that comes out of the
your
center of its
Bullgrin or
chest
Yeti.
or whatever.
Yeah, I was about to say maybe
Right.
you proxy some dope Yetis as your Bullgrin or
Bullgrins,
something.
That'd be dope.
What were those things called for bolt action? Ursas?
Yeah, the
Ursa
bear,
soldiers?
the
Yeah, the
Bear
bear
Grins.
grins.
Bearmen.
Yeah.
I call them
But
bear
the Bearmen.
grins, but
The Berman.
Bear grins, dude.
Yeah.
Yes.
yeah,
Let me get
that's
some
what
of them
happens.
Bear grins.
You take the bear, you set it upright so he's standing on his back 2 legs, and then you give him the power maul and the shield from the Bullgrin kit, and he becomes a bear grin.
There you go.
Bear
you go.
grin. That sounds like something a Russian would
Easy
do.
conversion.
Right?
Yeah, right. So there's all sorts of everything exists when you're getting into speculative fiction, when you're getting into creative writing, everything that's out there kind of exists as your palette. Pull everything. Look at all of these different things and how they work and why they work and all of that. Even down to, we mentioned earlier, I looked it up, Doggerland, which was this entire area that existed off the coast of England that is now underwater. Like all of these little concepts that we talked about, all of them can be used as little tiny kernels or little tiny add-ins to whatever creative writing project you happen to be working on. Yeah, guys, I think we're pretty well wrapped. This is going to be a little bit of a longer episode, so I hope those of you listening enjoyed it. Chac, it was awesome having you on. I definitely feel like we barely scratched the surface with your community highlight stuff. I want to get a lot more into your nights. I want to get a lot more into your hobby journey and the different things that you enjoy about the game.
100%.
We need a night episode, you and I.
There you go.
There you go.
We need a brainstorming episode.
Yeah.
I also would love to have you back for more creative writing stuff. I'd love to pick your brain about all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
If you're interested.
Oh, I'm
let us
always
know. And if
I'm
the
always up for it.
listeners let us know.
If you need somebody to just jump on, I'm always up for it. So
Awesome. Well, yeah, guys, great having you on. Thank you very much. We'll get you back here in a couple of episodes for a community spotlight. But yeah, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and your stories with us. It was awesome, man.
cool.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about dead bodies and such too. That'll be a good episode.
Yeah. Oh, I can tell you about the time I boiled a head, or maybe the time that I've used a beetle box.
Oh, yes. Shrunken heads. Yes.
So I'm
Yes,
going
all
to
of this.
I'm going to Salem in November for a wedding.
I thought you were going to say a witch trial.
My buddy. So the bachelor party that I went to recently, my buddy and his wife are getting officially married in Salem. They got legally married already, but they're going to have like the big ceremony and everything in Salem in November. And the wife and I are both witchy people. So we're having this entire planning session about buying human bones. And like, we're actively talking about, because we're going to be in Salem and like, we're going to buy some bones.
When in Rome. Yeah.
Human
when in Rome.
bones.
I have
They're
a
really hard to get these days. I have to.
Yeah.
It's somebody overhearing the conversation was like, that's illegal, right?
No,
And I'm
it's
like,
not.
why you got to spoil my fun?
It's not
It's
illegal.
not. Yeah, it's not.
You can own.
I have.
It's just hard.
I have a hip replacement somewhere,
I
straight out of an old dead lady.
I almost pulled.
Turn it
Okay,
into
so shortly, I know we've been on for a long time.
Yeah.
So when I was one of the colleges I taught at, community college over here in Marin County, they actually had. I was really lucky. They had 15 full sets of human remains of bones.
That's awesome.
Mostly every other place I've taught, they've got a couple of plastic replicas. These you actually. So when I actually taught osteology and all, I could teach it using real bones. I could really have them do sex and age and all. And some of them had severe injuries on them. So nutritional deficiencies. And there was one that had a really badly non-set compound fracture that healed bad and all. You could see it and all. These all basically came from, I think, China or India for the most part. And but you could donate your body for be a skeleton. And there was a store in Berkeley, not in Berkeley, it's a town right next to Berkeley.
Can they tell how long your schlong is?
No, that's
Can you
just
tell that from bones.
Yeah, but
No.
you can tell by the size how thick the bones are if you spend a lot of time like using one arm over another one. So you can tell.
Oh.
Damn, dude, my right arm must be fucking huge.
we actually do that to look for like warriors, and if you see if they spend a lot of time swinging a club or something like that, the arm will be much better built up because the as your muscles grow, the bones underneath remodel and get thicker. So
Yeah, it's funny. I kind of have that issue, not from jerking off, but I have that issue from an old shoulder injury.
yeah,
So like my left arm
Oh, I
is,
thought you were gonna be like, I have that issue in my hips because my dick's so big.
yeah, it's so big. It's just, wears down the joints.
My hips are just fucking huge.
But my left arm atrophied a lot because of that injury, and it just kind of
so
never caught up.
I went to this
There's
bone
a-
store and they were talking to me, and he's like, they had a full human skeleton articulated. It was $5,000.
So awesome.
And he's like, there used to be about 3, but now China has stopped exporting the bones. We can't get them as much. Which is probably good because they're probably all political prisoners.
Yeah.
Anyway,
There's probably some slight icky there.
but I almost bought it. I didn't. And I wish I'd pulled the trigger. I mean, it's a lot of money for a skeleton, but
Some
they're
bones.
really hard to get
I
these
was gonna
days.
say, I was like, that's pretty cheap for a person.
Oh, right. $5,000.
I don't know what the cost is these days. So things like, you can't get them on like eBay or Amazon because they've got policies that say
Permits.
you can't sell basically body parts.
Right.
People have tried to sell body parts, their own, but
Yeah.
like sell their tattoos. I'm like, hey, we'll sell this guy.
That's actually a big thing. It's a big thing over in I think Japan and in
Yeah, they keep
Norway.
bodysuits.
Yeah,
But it's not
skin.
illegal to own human bone. Selling it is not usually illegal. It's how you acquired it that gives you issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Did you
from what I
dig up
under-
somebody? Did you come across a Native American burial and you're trying to?
Yeah.
There are all sorts of laws in the U.S. about what you should do if you find a body, and basically call the police.
Yeah. Well, and that's the actual thing was not that it would be illegal to buy it. There's a lot of laws against transporting across state lines, I guess.
Yeah,
How
there's-
illegal?
I've one of these times I'll tell you about transporting bodies across international borders.
So I actually have.
Chac has
Actually-
become the most interesting person to me now. I was just like the more we're sitting here, I'm like, I'm going to talk to this guy more.
So I've got a fully anatomical teaching skeleton in the garage. And I want to put it upstairs in one of our, because we've got like a it's not really an attic because it's a finished room, but it's
Well,
like
what's their name?
What's his favorite snack?
What's their name?
his name is Ed Mel Kilmer. My 3 favorite actors ever. So we have an anatomical skeleton because we filmed a lot of horror films and we needed a dead body. So we built a lot of the dead body either using the anatomical skeleton as like mold pieces or just dressing up the anatomical skeleton in different stuff. But we named him after our 3 favorite actors, Ed Norton, Val Kilmer, and Mel Gibson, and that those are all sarcastic answers. None of those are my favorite.
I was like, Val Kilmer.
Those are the 3. So inside it, peeling back a little bit, like the B, not even the B, the D rank movie curtain. There's a lot of, when you start working on short films, when you start working on like D-list stuff, you get looped in enough to what's actually happened. Cause like a lot of so the dude that does special effects for the big blockbuster movie, the guy who does practical blood effects for the big blockbuster movie, loves doing practical blood effects. So he does them for, Zombie Beaver 2 as well. Like, he's not going, I worked on Jurassic Park. I can't possibly be involved
I feel like
his
blood
entire
never gets-
enjoyment is playing with fake blood, he's gonna
Making
do
it
it as
squirt.
much as he can.
Dude, I feel like blood never is like properly.
No, it's
Like,
more blood
shown.
looks better in like low budget horror films than it ever does in a big budget film.
Yeah,
Because in a big budget film, they're always trying to like perfect it and make it look perfect.
dude,
And
I
in
watched
a low
Blade.
budget film.
I watched Blade last week, and I was like, nah.
Blade.
Yeah,
This shit's-
bullshit.
Blade.
I appreciate the link I just got. But so one of the guys that we talked to basically outlined like the 5 worst actors to work with ever, and those 3 individuals were all in that list of 5.
Yeah.
Christian Bale is also there. There's apparently just some legendarily difficult people to work with. And then like, I get it in one case, at fucking hour 12, when somebody asks me a dumb question at work, I get super mad. But like at the same time, I imagine if work was shoving millions of dollars into my hand every 3 or 4 months, I would probably not get that irritated at dumb questions, but who knows?
Until you got used to that money.
That's true. Anyway, well, shit, Chac, we're going to have you back on.
All right.
That's the moral of the story here. We want to know what lore you guys out there in the podcast verse, our listeners, have written. We want to know, we keep asking you for your guard lore, but we're moving on. We're not going to talk about the Imperial Guard ever again. It's over. Not a
That's a lie.
single minute further of the podcast will be. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. But yeah, send us your Imperial Guard regimental lore. Send us your Eldari lore. Send us your lore about creatures that exist on your home planets. Tom has mentioned it a couple of times. I think we talked about it here even in this episode. There are some crazy ass planets. There's some crazy ass rules from Rogue Trader that dealt with like making creatures. We're getting into it. It is coming up. We're just trying
Once
to
we
lay
get
the
our hands on a
foundation
Rogue
the way we
Trader
want.
book.
Yeah, we're
I
trying
want to
get
talk
one
about
so
my
bad,
whale
man.
wolves.
Whale wolves. I want to hear about your whale wolves. By the way, you mentioned earlier that like howler monkeys, the first time you hear them, like that you're just not prepared for it.
No, they're
The
horrifying.
first time you hear a whale underwater while scuba diving, I don't care how beautiful of a picture or how poetic or how romantic you want to be. That shit is fucking terrifying. And if you say otherwise, your brain is deficient and doesn't immediately tell you you're a tiny bath toy when you hear those.
Everything in the ocean is terrifying.
Yes.
I'm
Oh my
telling you,
God,
I
man.
agree.
Hearing a
The
whale
ocean-
make whale sound underwater, I was like, oh, I'm small. Like that
The
was
ocean
it was a
has a weird creepiness to it, and that's what like.
very
Oh
haunting.
man,
No, everything
jumping
about
into
the
water
ocean,
that like is just like dark and like murky, like not
Yeah.
like murky, but like ocean, like just dark where you can't see anything, is just creepy.
everything about the ocean is bad. You know what's one thing in the ocean? Like, we're not meant to be there. A goldfish is better equipped in water than I am. You know why? What's one? Here's the thing. What does the ocean have that I need? I don't know. Air. Can't breathe it. Shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
just my 2 cents.
I've been diving since I was 18. There's still things that freak me out.
Yeah. So anyway, you can get that stuff to us by our email, which is either underthehiveofmadness@gmail.com or jimdarkgaming@gmail.com. You can join our growing community on Discord, as Chac mentioned earlier. We have a lot of channels there for hobby progress, official GW lore, homebrew lore, tactics, all sorts of other things in the 40K universe, as well as just general hobby stuff and a lot of video game channels.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch. We're usually on there. I mean, myself and Kevin, specifically, we're usually on there, 3 or 4 times a week, where we'll be playing video games, things like that. We have a couple channels specifically for that, for people to jump in and just talk while they're playing whatever they are. We have another channel that's dedicated specifically to people who are playing in-game together. So it's pretty much one of the best ways to actually get in contact with us. I mean, we try very hard to be very approachable on there. So.
And I'm always digressing about lore to a state that everybody's probably like, shut up.
Don't approach me. Don't approach me.
You could talk to Marky about
Yeah,
lore.
you
Don't-
talk
don't
on there more
approach
than
me.
anybody.
Don't approach me.
But yeah, Chac, do you got anything you want to plug as far as social media goes?
Yeah.
Any projects that you want to mention?
Well, you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Chac Balam. Search for Chac Balam. You should be able to find it. That's ChacBalam. By the way, Chac is the Mayan god of thunder, and Balam is jaguar. So Chac Balam. And I have a lot of my hobby stuff. I have some anthropology stuff, a little bit of baking, stuff like that here and there. So
that bread looks so good, Chac.
It
looks so good. When you posted it this morning, I was like, oh.
All right, I'm going to get up on that.
I'm going to, when we're done here, I'm going to go inside and get something to eat because I did not expect this to be running quite this long, let me tell you.
That's what
First mistake.
First mistake for a 1 hour podcast.
Tangent supremists.
This is typical, Chac. This is typical.
This will come out and you'll be like, how the hell did Ryan edit it down to?
That's what I'm saying. Like, that's the whole thing, man. Like, you can, like, people don't understand how much work goes into these.
No,
but yeah. You guys can find Chac where he mentioned. I will put spellings down in the description, in our show notes description. You guys can also find us at our website under thehiveofmadness.com, and there's a couple of links there. Chac, I know you're part of our Patreon. You wanna plug it for us?
I sure would. Listen, I think that, well, if you're listening to this, you know it's a good podcast. If you just signed into this one and you're like, I thought this was a 40K podcast, what the fuck's going on? It is
got him.
one of the best 40K podcasts out there. It's one of 3 that I listen to all the time. One I always argue with, scream at when I'm listening to it, which is not Under the Hive of Madness.
I have a feeling I know which one you're talking about because I'm constantly screaming at the hosts too.
Yeah, there are 2 of them, and they don't do accurate lore. They do entertaining stuff, and I yell at them a lot. And then there's another one that I also won't mention. But listen, I joined the Patreon with these guys almost from the first time I listened to the episode. I don't really support other podcasts the same way. And I upped it. I just upped my, for whatever reason, I upped my, how much I gave you at one point. I might have to do that again because I enjoy it so much. But, I just think that this is great. It's great content that comes out. You get a little extra places to interact on the Discord server. And I really, if you found this and have not found the Discord server, really go on there. It's a great community. The painting contests are wonderful. Just the hobby parts of it are great. The lore sections on the server are great. And just the people there are really, really nice. And I'd really recommend it. But really built a good community, and it's very active, and these guys are very active on. It's not like some of them where there are 10,000 people on the server and you never talk to the people that you hear on the podcast. You'll talk to these guys every day. So,
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Nailed it.
Awesome. Again, all the links that you guys might need to either find us, to find Chac, to find Patreon, whatever you're trying to look for, will be in our show notes. Thank you very much for listening. Chac, again, thank you very much for joining us.
You're
Looking
awesome,
forward to planning our next guest spot with you. That's the way to do it right there. I tell you what.
While he comes back to radio, I had a crazy tinfoil hat moment while you were talking about Bigfoot possibly crossing the land bridge. My tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that I came up with in the 10 seconds that it took you to say that was, what if it was being hunted by humans and chased into North America?
Or what if it was hunting the humans and chasing them
That
into
was
North
the other
America?
I had that too. I was like, or if it followed us.
That's the money, right? That's the money nut right there.
Mm-hmm.
What if the Imperium of Man is real and it's not Bigfoot? It's just the breed of Ambull that those assholes brought here and left for us to deal with. Dan Abnett, I'm mad at you. come on our podcast. Well, that'll wrap it up today for Vox Free Innsmouth, bringing you the truth in all caps every single week. Gents, I don't know about you, but there's about 70 other vendors here in Slackjaw Alley, and I pretty much want to shop at every single freaking one of them.
I'm looking for a shrunken head, man. Those rare and lucky.
Rare
Shock's
and
got
lucky?
one.
Rare and lucky.
Shock's got one.
Remember, don't fear what you can see in the sump. Fear the four-armed emperor that you can't see in the sump. Or the sump toilet mushrooms. Either one. You can't see one or both of those, you're probably in trouble.
They glow in the fucking dark.
Yeah, you got those ghost turds too, man.
Did you get that?
Real spooky.
Did you get that information from reading a fucking book?